Like, to me, a talented person is someone who enjoys that hard work, someone who has an aptitude to enjoy the thing that is inherently uncomfortable.
Hey, it's Dr. V. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. And I am so pumped for this episode. You're going to be meeting a good friend of mine, Osric Chau. He is a working Hollywood actor. You've seen him on Arrow. You've seen him on DC's Legend of the Universe. You've seen him on Supernatural. Just a super nice guy. But what I want you to hear is really his story of discovering himself, the story of becoming authentic again. And it's really that road. You know, he uses that in the discussion of how he becomes a successful actor, but we can use that very same story, those sets of mindset when we are wanting to improve our health, because it's really coming back to who we are authentically. You know, I talk about in my TED Talk, not being who we are making us sick. And we dive into that story today. So ladies and gentlemen, Osric Chau. Osric has actually been a full-time working actor since 2002. He got a first shot behind the camera as a director's assistant in the Chinese remake of What Women Want. He since has produced a number of short films between acting roles and culminating to producing his first feature called Empty by Design, which was premiered at the closing night at the Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival. And it won Best International Feature Film at the Soho International Film Festival and was the centerpiece film for the Austin Asian Film Festival, Seattle Asian Film Festival, and the Vancouver Asian Film Festival. He is now actively writing and developing a slate of new feature films, so be sure to check him out. It's going to be a really fun conversation. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Osric Chau. Osric, thanks for joining us, brother.
Thanks for having me. We're really happy to be here, really excited.
Well, thanks, man. I mean, what a small world. I don't think I heard of you. And then the person who I train with, Eric, the trainer, Eric Fleischman, mentions this Asian guy. He's like, you know what? You've got awesome energy like this guy, Osric Chau. And then all of a sudden we meet through a mutual friend, Kevin Kreider. And then it turns out the person I end up dating, who's now my fiance now, actually cut your hair for the longest time.
Yeah, it's what a small world. Also, I didn't know Eric had a last name. I always thought his last name was The Trainer.
Was the trainer, right? Hello, Mr. The Trainer. That's pretty awesome. So look, I am so glad you're here. A lot of people ask me, why do I have people in entertainment talk about health and mindset? And I feel like there's so many things that are in parallel, particularly in a situation like this where, there is an Asian person breaking into an industry that did not have too many role models. And I find that the parallel of somebody who is not healthy and their parents or their family, were all obese, thinking there's no other way. So breaking through the mindset and working through all of that is something that I'm really interested in diving into. You wrote a spoken word piece a while ago, and was this completely true, or is any of that stuff sort of fictionalized, or was that all you?
That was, man, I can't even remember how long ago I did that, but I remember it was like 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And I was just in one of these mindsets, and I just started writing this thing. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to record it and put it out there because I think like maybe there's someone that might need to hear that.
Ooh, and as you say that, I'm getting goosebumps, and that just means that I resonate so much. So I'm going to remind you of this stuff. What do I want to be when I grow up? They smiled enthusiastically. It might as well have been sarcastically, because the day they stopped looking down at my head was the same day they started looking down at what I said. Okay, maybe it wasn't all possible, but I was okay with just the plausible. I wasn't a diva. I didn't make a scene. I was just a teen that had just started to dream. So tell me, Osric, I mean, you've done so much great work representing Asians out in the entertainment industry where very few Asians are doing good work. When you said you started to dream, what did you see Hollywood, or did you see entertainment as that dream at that point in your life as a teenager?
I didn't. When I was a teenager, I think the thing that I was struggling most with was that my life was seemingly laid out for me in a way that I was starting to understand just wasn't right for me. right?
Yeah.
So like I grew up thinking that I would graduate from high school, go to college, find a girl in college, graduate college, get a job that would turn into a career. I would have 3 kids by the time I was 25, right? Like
Yeah.
that was the idea that was kind of laid out to me, not in those terms, but like I just grew up expecting like, okay, I have to do this. Now I have to do that, right? The path was laid out. I didn't really have to make a decision, but like just the going to university part I was struggling with. I'm like, okay, I know to go to university, I have to get X amount of grades, but I just couldn't find it in myself to study these subjects that I needed to do because for me, there was no purpose, right? And that was the thing that took me longer to realize is that I didn't have a purpose. I just had a goal. And
Sure. And
I
then going through that
yeah.
process, Osric, did you feel like, so it just sounds like to me that life just didn't seem right and you weren't able to place your finger on it, but it didn't seem like it was something that was laid out for you, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Like I was just searching for something. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew that what I was doing wasn't the right answer. So I remember there was this one year that I spent like 20, I had like 20 to 30 different jobs. And it's just like I would get the job, I would get excited for the prospects of it, I would enjoy the training, and then after a couple of days, I would just kind of see my entire life flash before my eyes. I'm like, man, tomorrow's going to be the same. Next week's going to be the same. A month from now, it's going to be the same. Like, I've already lived this life. What's the point?
So very interesting. How would you know life to be any different? Did you have people around you that just felt lit up and passionate? Or did you know that it wasn't supposed to feel so robotic and monotonous?
I don't know. I think I grew up as a bit of a rebel. Me and my brothers, we all kind of rebelled against like what was expected of us. Like all of our older cousins, they became doctors, lawyers, very professional types of people, full scholarships to universities and all that. And here we are, like, I think my younger brother did the best and he has like a 2-year certificate, but like none of us like really went the academic route, to the dismay of my parents, but we all eventually found our way. And I think it, like, if I really think about it, like Naruto was an anime that I watched growing up, and that like affected me in such drastic ways that I only start realizing now. I'm like, man, all of those lessons, like really, like finding your own ninja way, finding your own path, was such a big thing that I eventually found. Like the one thing that my dad told me growing up that he probably regretted for a little moment, but it finally sunk in a while back. And he said, like, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. Right.
That's
and
amazing.
So I remember I was working at Canada Post, and it was a great job at the time. I was a kid. It was a very competitive job to even get. You're getting paid like 20 something dollars an hour when the minimum wage was like $8 an hour.
Yeah.
And you have full benefits. I had like full flexibility, a schedule. I could work whenever I wanted, but I was just sorting mail. Right. And it didn't matter how fast I sorted, and I was the fastest sorter there. There were still like millions of pieces left to sort. And so in my mind, I'm like, man, like I'm sorting this mail. I would rather pay someone to do this, because I would, if I, and I was doing this math in my head, if I paid someone like $10 an hour to do this, I could just play World of Warcraft with the profits. Like I was doing weird thoughts. And at some point, there's this one day where I just kind of like fell over and I started bleeding out of my nose. And like I don't remember blanket out, but I was just like so bored that happened. And I went, cleaned myself off, went back to sorting. And then my manager's like, comes up to me very concerned. He's like, I think you should probably just go home. And I'm like, I feel fine, but sure. And so I went home, and that was the last day I ever showed up. I realized, I'm like, why am I there? I don't need the money that badly.
Yeah.
Like I don't need it enough for me to put myself through something that I feel like I'm literally killing myself.
Yeah. Well, I think that was such a wise thing your father told you. What did he do for a living?
The exact opposite. Now I find myself at odds with my dad, because our values are so opposite, right? Like he was a computer programmer, he created a bunch of software, and we had this talk, like I think it was like 5 years ago now, where he's like, I'm glad you're doing well for yourself, son. I just wish that it still makes me anxious. Like, I wish you knew when your next paycheck was going to come in. I wish you had like, a proper pension and all of these things. I wish you knew all of these things. And he started describing his career essentially
Yeah.
in his life. And I really thought about that. And I'm like, Dad, I think if I had all of those things, I would probably just kill myself. I mean, a little dramatic. I was in one of those moods, but to me, he was describing jail, right? Like,
And it's important to know that and to recognize where people are with that, because in the end of the day, it's our own reality that dictates our emotions and how we feel and how it affects our body. I straddle those worlds, and I look back at you because I remember as a kid, I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to do something in entertainment or whatnot, doing what everybody else wanted to do, and wanting to make my parents proud for having me survive on an 8-month refugee boat and wanting to give back to them led me to a point where I was chasing down this path that wasn't me. And eventually that puts you in the energy of getting actually chronic disease. So I love the fact that you eventually kind of found that. But, going back to that day you came home and you didn't go and sort mail anymore. What then? Did you know, okay, it's not this, but what is the next step? What did Osric do next?
I thought long and hard, and the only thing that I ever kind of enjoyed was that one acting job that I had. And I'm like, you know what? I did it. I thought it was a fluke. I thought I won the lottery and I was never going to win again. But that's the only thing that I kind of liked, right? Mm-hmm. And even if like there were moments that I didn't like, there was still an end date. So there's no reason to quit because it would end and then that would be it.
Yeah.
Right. So I decided, I'm like, okay, well, I'll just do that thing. Right. And I wasn't in love with acting. I just kind of liked it and I enjoyed stunts. So I kind of did that. And I think it was something that I learned to love. And so I have a general philosophy and I'm still following it to this day. But whenever someone asks me like, about like, I don't know what I want to do in life. I'm like, well, just follow the things you like and hopefully they'll lead you to something you love. And when you love it, you will know. Right. And so I try to pursue this acting thing, and instead of just doing it half-heartedly like I had been for the last decade, I just put my full effort into it. I treated it like a career. I treated it like this was my thing. And when I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm absolutely doing this. Like I had the mentality, and I told my parents this, I'm like, I would rather sleep on the streets than do anything else at this point. And so,
that's
like,
amazing.
Yeah. So there was no, like the Gretzky quote of, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. Like for me at that point, my fear of not trying this thing was greater than my fear of failing. Right. So then there was only one option to just do the thing.
Amazing. And how were you when you first started? I recognize I want to go out. I want to do more public speaking. I'm out there on TV and I see myself do that and I cringe. So how were you when you first started, and how did you deal with maybe not being like, your hero that you're looking up to, who's probably done it for a long time?
I think I was fortunate as well that I started at a very young age and I didn't really take it seriously. And so I had a lot of years under my belt of just being shit, but not caring about it because I didn't identify as an actor yet. Yeah. Right. And so by the time I like actually gave it a real shot, I was already like, I wasn't a full beginner anymore. Right. Yeah. Like I wasn't an expert by any means, but I was definitely more experienced to kind of start getting work. And even now, like I'm learning all the time. Like I'm like, oh man, like last year I was such a shit actor, and I say that every single year. Right. I will say like last month I was such a shit actor because I'm constantly improving. And now I'm at the point I'm like, man, is acting my thing? Like, do I even want to act anymore? Like maybe I want to transition to something else. Right. And so like you're constantly reevaluating things. Like I don't want to take anything for granted. I don't want to just assume that just because I've placed myself on this path, that this is the path I have to go on. Right. I'm constantly finding myself. And the main thing is you don't know what you don't know. And if you stop exploring, then maybe you do know based off of everything you know. But I'm too curious to stop exploring.
And I think that's a very, very amazing point there is to be so, and I noticed that of a lot of artists is their ability to be able to deal with, have gratitude in, and enjoy the uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, I think that is the thing that I love the most.
Yeah.
And there's this interesting thing that I was reading about gaming, because I am, my heart of hearts, I'm a pretty big gamer. And one element that game developers put in games, and this is the same with gambling, is they put in an element of randomness, of chance. And that is the thing that actually becomes addictive. And maybe that is how I've kind of put it into life, because like, as I've explained it to my dad, I'm like, Dad, like my next 10 jobs, I could be working for free. I could be working 24/7 for free because I love these projects. But then the one after that, I could get paid like $1 million for a day of work for no reason. And I don't end up doing anything. Like, I love that randomness, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's probably equal chances that none of that happened, but I just love that anything's possible and I just cannot predict it.
That's amazing. You probably have a lot of cohorts, whether it be friends you grew up with or family members who might be on the same path, or not that, more of the straight and narrow life designed for you path. Do you keep in touch with them, or do you know them very well, or most of the people you hang with, artists like yourself?
I mean, most of my family is that way, and it is a fairly close family, and of course we keep in touch, and everyone's happy. They're they all have their families and kids, and I'm probably the farthest thing from having that lifestyle, but I think it's a mutual appreciation based off of what you have. I think the main thing is, are you happy, right? Like,
right.
Everyone defines success, and everyone is happy with different things. So I think the main thing is, are you able to be grateful for the things that you have? It's not. You don't ever want to be the person like, oh, I wish this, I wish that. There's so many wonderful things in everyone's life. If we can't, appreciate those things, then you're just living a very unhappy life.
I would imagine a lot of friends and family members, only because the arts is not necessarily, particularly in the Asian community, isn't necessarily encouraged as a career path much, that you probably have a lot of people around you that are very sort of maybe envious that you followed your heart. Do you find that you have friends that kind of come up, oh man, Osric, I wish I would have done that, or I wish I would have taken that chance, or how do you do that? Because, my parents want me to be this engineer or whatever.
I mean, I think most of my friends are on the same boat as me. Like, we're all doing our things. We're all in different stages of aspiring success. And certainly, I have a lot of like old acquaintances or friends of friends that might ask me those things, and I'll give them different forms of advice. I follow what you like, make sure you want this. Like, for the film industry, I'm like, it's such a sexy career, it's very attractive. People like it for the idea of it. I'm like, first thing is like, figure out if you really want to do this. Like, the best advice they say is to tell people, like, don't do this. Here are all the shitty parts of this career, right? And if they still try, then they might be right for it. I'm like, you're going to be thinking of acting. You're going to be thinking of getting paid to work. You're going to be thinking of red carpets and all that stuff. I'm like, well, 99% of it is actually the audition. It's going to get headshots. It's struggling. It might be busting tables while you're waiting for an audition. Like, that's the bulk of the work. If you can't love that part, then this might not be for you, right? So there's this wonderful quote. I can never remember who said it, but they said, like, for the artist, like, one thing you really have to ask yourself, like, if you want to live a creative life, you have to ask yourself, what is your favorite flavor of shit sandwich? You're going to be eating a lot of it, so you might as well kind of enjoy that flavor, right? And if we're talking about like talent, right? What is a talented person? Like, to me, a talented person is someone who enjoys that hard work, someone who has an aptitude to enjoy the thing that is inherently uncomfortable. If you enjoy something that all of your friends like, I don't know why you're doing that, well, you're probably going to get way better at that than everyone else. And so you should probably pursue that path. And I found that I enjoyed auditioning. I enjoyed figuring out this puzzle. I enjoyed not working for months on end and then getting too busy all of a sudden. I enjoy that life. And so for me, it's not hard.
So this is a very, great point, because I work with clients and patients, and I tell them, on the road to health and transformation, sometimes if you focus on the outcome only, it could bog you down, because you don't know when you're going to get that outcome. You have no idea. But if you trust in the path, if you trust that your actions will eventually lead to something, and then you allow just the actions you take every day to be the win, and you can celebrate that, then that's something you can walk home feeling proud about. And it really sounds like you've enjoyed all those actions, even the ugly stuff in between.
You have to. And that saying I will absolutely agree with. Like, I mean, they always say, it's the journey that counts. It's not the goal. It's not the destination. In having produced a movie, and I'm starting a restaurant right now, those things also remain true. So let's take the restaurant, for example. Like, we can design the restaurant. We can have like everything like fully on spec, and we'll be like, okay, this restaurant is going to cost that much, right? Like, it's going to cost $2 million to build out this restaurant. This is our dream restaurant. Now, if we were to aim for this dream restaurant now, and like, okay, we're going to have this dream restaurant. As we go through the steps, we'll be like, oh, okay, because of this engineer, we actually can't have this wall like this, which means we have to change this, right? And so now we're like, okay, well, let's fix it. Let's change it, right? So that's going to cost a couple $1,000. And then something else changes, and then like the plumbing's not right. And so you have to change all these things. Basically, we are constantly having to change things back to this original dream, because there's so many variables that we could not conceive of that are changing this thing. And we want our dream restaurant, instead of the $2 million build out, all of a sudden it's a $5 million build out. I think that is the case for most things. You can have that dream, but if you adhere so closely to what you have envisioned and you can't like at all stray from it, it's going to be very expensive. So unless you're rich in resources, it's really hard to actually do that. So for our method, and this is the same in film, right? Like, there's so many variables, you cannot foresee all of the different ones. So what you do instead is you have a general direction. You're like, okay, we don't know what it's actually going to look like, but we know it's going to be in this realm forward. And so every decision that we take, as long as it moves us forward, then it's fine, right? So first thing, wall has to be like this. Great, looks great. Now the next thing, the floor. Well, okay, this floor matches the wall. And it's, of the options that we have, it is the most inexpensive, and it fits so beautifully. Perfect. And then you just kind of build and build and build, and every decision you make fits with every other decision you've made, and it's still going in that direction, so that by the time you get to the end, it's kind of a surprise what it is. But it's still in that direction that you kind of planned, and it's all of a sudden it's like a $500,000 restaurant because you saved a lot of money going forward because you didn't force yourself into any decision. And so not only did you get a great deal, but you get this wonderful surprise of something that you already, like, you knew you were going to like it because it all made sense in and of itself, but you just don't know. And so I think living life is kind of like that. You don't know what you don't know. So how can you plan for it? Right? When we talk about like taking chances and doing the thing, like our minds go to the negative right away because we foresee the negatives. We never think of all the positives that could happen because we just can't foresee the positives because we don't hear about that enough.
We definitely have a negativity bias in our brains. Basically our default mode network is used to kind of keep us safe. And so failing at something not turning out right, our primitive brains actually think that we might die or be in danger because of that. So, it's built into us.
Well, what's the worst that can happen at this point? How many situations are people actually going in that you can actually die?
Exactly. And that's what I tell people all the time is recognize if there's not a saber-toothed tiger running behind you, or you're actually falling off a 10-story building, that everything else is made up in our head. And if we have awareness of the thought that puts us in that mode, then we could therefore identify that and then choose to have a different thought that could put us in a different mindset or behavior and emotional state. So, I find that your approach and your mindset towards all this stuff is brilliant. Would you say that that's something you've trained yourself to desire? I mean, or was there ever a period of time where you were going through the shit and you're like, this stuff sucks? Or did you like, you know what? This is the work I need to put in and I'm going to enjoy it or not enjoy it. Tell me about mastering that type of mindset, because I feel that that's where people start to give up sometimes.
There's an element of me being super stubborn, and honestly, some of the best motivation in my life is when someone tells me they don't think I can do something. So honestly, that alone would keep me going for a decade, right? But besides that, like, it's such a volatile industry.
Yeah.
And, if you let the highs get too high or the lows get too low, I feel like anyone would succumb to it. So for me, I've been very conscious of that. And I always been trying to temper all of it. So if it's a really high, I'll be like, I'm going to appreciate it. It's not always going to last. And if it's a really low, I'm going to be like, this is also not going to last. And it's going to help me appreciate my next one. So I try to like bring everything back to the center as much as I can, because I feel like it all evens out. But obviously in the moment, like, you're just fixated on this one moment. But if you just take a step back, you can see the ups and downs, and it averages out.
So tell me, what was your highest high?
I don't even know. Honestly, I think it's still to come. I mean, ideally it's still to come, but like, honestly, every time I get a job, it's like such a surprise. I'm like, what? They picked me? I got a job? I'm going to be working. I'm going to be able to pay the bills and worry about taxes again this year. It's such a big surprise every time. It doesn't matter, even if like it's an offer, even if I knew I was going to get the job, it's still a surprise. Just because it's such a miracle that anything gets off the ground, that, you have to be excited about it. I don't ever want to get so jaded. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll do this thing. I'm in this industry because I love it. I love the process. I love working with the people. So it's still such a joy to actually get a job.
In your spoken word quote, you mentioned the phrase, so I took a moment and asked myself, what do I want to be? And the only thing I could think of was that I just wanted to be me. And it's so beautiful. And I feel like it's an evolutionary process, that it's an iterative process for me to discover myself new almost every day. Did you say that there was a knowing from you? Was there a period of time you're like, this doesn't feel right, but it doesn't feel like it's me? I mean, I know so many people walking around feeling that way because they feel like life should be a certain way, or a way, it was laid out for me and I don't know how to find me. Where would you say you came up to that definition? I mean, would you say that you know yourself pretty well now? And tell me about that evolution of thought process.
I mean, I think it's a constant discovery of yourself.
Yeah.
I think for everyone, it doesn't matter where you are. Like, therapists have therapists, right?
Yeah.
Like, we only know so much, but if you've stopped asking questions, like, you're still evolving. You're gonna fall behind at some point. For me, that statement came when I was pretty early on, when I was starting this industry, and my aunts and uncles and everyone, they're like, okay, he's actually gonna try to do this thing. And they would all offer advice. They don't know this industry, but everyone's gonna offer advice because they love me, and they're, it comes from a loving place. But their advice was, well, you're Asian. I'm like, thank you, I knew that. Well, you should go where all the Asian roles are in Asia. Like, why are you here? You should join like these talent show. There's these like male beauty pageants for Asian kids, boys and girls, and like the winner would go to like Hong Kong for TVB. Like, you should do that. You would do really well in that. You probably win and go to Hong Kong and live a TVB life. That I already knew that I didn't want to do. Like, I think the contest was called like Sunshine Boys. I'm like, I don't want to be a sunshine boy. Thank you very much. But I did end up moving to Beijing for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And as much as I loved learning Mandarin, I loved working on some projects, and the industry was booming at the time. Like, this was in 2010, and I already knew that within a decade, I knew that China was going to probably take over, right? And so there was such an excitement in the air, but at the same time, like, I just felt like I was trying to be someone I wasn't. So my first realization when I came into China was that I am not Chinese, right? Like, I grew up representing China in class. I was
Yeah.
the Chinese kid. I did the social studies project on China. This is my culture. This is, these are the foods we eat. But when I go to China, I realize like, okay, that is my heritage. These are my roots, but my culture is really North American.
Yeah.
This is the media I grew up watching. It did not reflect who I am, but it still is such a big part of me. So rather than like be in Asia, pretend to be someone I'm not, pretend to be like a mainland Chinese person, even if I had a higher chance of success, I couldn't do that to myself. And so after a while, I just had to go back home and say like, okay, I need to change my purpose. I need to make it here. I need to change the culture so that the next kid that was my age, who was wishing someday he would grow up to be a beautiful white boy, would not have to do that.
That's a beautiful why. It's a beautiful purpose. I mean, hell, you're inspiring older kids to follow their dreams too, my friend. So good to be able to hear all this. And I want the listeners to really, get this. I mean, what Osric is talking about, authenticity, about knowing your why, about knowing your purpose, about knowing who you are and living that is so important, because people who are off in that, people who are doing something that they know in their body is just not them, that actually has biochemical mediators in your body. Cortisol goes up, epinephrine goes up, and that's a way of leading into chronic disease. And I don't know if people know that, but not being who you are can make you sick.
That makes sense. I know that stress is a leading cause of all types of illness, and I try to live a very low stress life. Despite how crazy and volatile it is, I tend to be a very low stress person because, you just kind of have to roll with it, right? Like good things, bad things, mediocre things, like it all affects me the same. Like I will just take it. And I have one philosophy that I try to stick with. I will only worry about things that I can actually control. Yeah. And everything else, like it honestly, like I'll take it in, but like I'm not going to worry about it because it is beyond my control. So what's the point?
Amazing. Speaking of out of your control, tell me about the industry now and what has happened with the coronavirus, pandemic. I mean, there's, obviously nothing we can control. I know studios were shut down earlier in the year. What's the situation now in Canada or the other studios that worldwide, and what are you working on?
Yeah. So when the pandemic happened, when anything bad happens, like obviously people are going to immediately think of, all right, like what does this mean for the industry? I think the creative and clever people will think, okay, the industry is changing. That means there's going to be a new demand for something else. Like, how do we get in on the new thing rather than just wait for this to blow over? So I think the studios that are ahead of the game have, some have started building, like Tyler Perry built this COVID-free village, essentially. Mm-hmm. I think Tom Cruise just came in the news a couple of days ago. They're trying to do the same. Vancouver, all the studios, they're actually up and running. We have a lot of productions going on right now, and everyone has their own COVID safety guidelines. Everyone's trying to adhere to it because, one case could risk shutting an entire village down, essentially. So I think everyone's taking it seriously. From my side, knowing that I wasn't going to act for a while, I put my efforts into development. So I've been writing and developing a lot, features, TV scripts, and I have a couple of projects that are maybe getting off the ground as soon as next year. So I've been very fortunate and excited to have made that switch when I did, because it's honestly, it's just as exciting, if not more exciting, to kind of be in the driver's seat for a project that I could choose to act in or not if I don't feel like it. And it's kind of nice.
That's amazing. Dude, I mean, such an inspirational story. I do have one question left for you. And before I get to that question, people who haven't heard you, haven't seen you yet, where can they follow you or find out more about you now?
You can follow me on at Osric Chau. If you can spell my name, you can follow me. There's only, I don't know another Osric out there. I know they exist, but I haven't met one yet. But Osric Chau at Instagram and Twitter. You can follow me there.
Amazing. All right, Osric. So wild life you got, very inspirational life you've got. If you have to look back now, what would you say was your best medicine?
Oh, my best medicine. I think it's community.
Ah, yes.
if I think back to every city that I've been in, and the reason why I love film is because it's a collaborative process, and every time you go into something, it's a community effort, right? It takes a village.
Yeah.
Right. LA took me 7 years to enjoy the place, and what was the difference? It was when I found my community.
Yeah.
And I found that group of people that are all looking in the same direction, who are all striving for the same things, and are there to lift each other up. When someone needs it, you lift them up. When you need it, hopefully they're there too, right? And that just makes all the difference, because it's such a, again, it's a volatile industry. It can be such a lonely world, pandemic, or not non-pandemic times. And so just having those people around you to keep you motivated makes all the difference in the world.
That's beautiful. Community is actually one of the 7 things I talk about in my new book in terms of how we actually control how ourselves behave. So that's a beautiful sentiment. Community being your best medicine. Osric Chau, thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me on this episode. If you received value, I truly, truly appreciate it. If you could leave a 5-star review, it will help the show grow. And I'd love to connect with you. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at KienVuMD. If you haven't already, pick up a copy of my book, Thrive State, at thrivestatebook.com. And remember, you are your best medicine.